Zayn was on his way to school for his final exam, the last step before finally finishing college. Since he was early, he decided to stop by a cafe near his school to relax for a while. As he sat there, he noticed a man picking up a necklace from the floor. Looking closely, Zayn realized it looked just like his lucky necklace, the one he always wore to important events. He instinctively touched his neck and froze. His necklace wasn't there. Certain the necklace the man picked up was his, Zayn approached him. "Excuse me, can I have the necklace you picked up? It's mine." The man, Gavin, shook his head. "You're mistaken. It's mine." Zayn frowned. "How can it be yours if you just picked it up from the ground?" "It fell from my pocket," Gavin replied. "So yes, it's mine." Zayn wasn't convinced. "No, I'm sure it's mine. Can I see it?" Gavin sighed, but pulled out the necklace to show him. The moment Zayn saw it, he exclaimed, "That's mine. The design is exactly the same." Gavin quickly pulled the necklace back. "Look, I'm really busy. I need to leave." He turned to walk away, but Zayn grabbed him from behind, stopping him in his tracks. "You can't leave without returning my necklace," Zayn said, holding on tightly. At this point, every eye in the cafe was on them. Some customers began urging Gavin to return the necklace, calling him a thief. Frustrated, Zayn threatened, "If you don't give it back, I'll take you to the police." "Good," Gavin replied, shrugging Zayn off and grabbing his hand. He led him out of the cafe, to his car, and put him in the passenger seat. Gavin got in the driver's seat and started the car. "Where are you taking me?" Zayn demanded, glancing around nervously. "The police station," Gavin said flatly. As they drove, Zayn couldn't help but notice how luxurious the car was. For a moment, he questioned if Gavin really had any reason to steal a necklace, but he was also certain he'd been wearing it until he sat at the cafe. Whatever Gavin had, it had to be his. When they arrived at the police station, Zayn confidently filed his complaint. Both men were questioned, but in the end, the police ruled there was no concrete evidence proving the necklace belonged to Zayn, or that it didn't belong to Gavin. Annoyed, they dismissed the case, scolding them for wasting time over such a trivial matter. Zayn walked out of the station, dejected and still suspicious, while Gavin walked back to his car. Zayn absently checked his watch and froze. He was almost late for his exam. Panicking, he ran after Gavin, who was about to drive off. "Wait," Zayn shouted, waving his arms. Gavin rolled down his window, staring at him with an unreadable expression. "Can you drop me off at my school? If you don't, I'll definitely miss my exam. And honestly, this is kind of your fault," Zayn said. Gavin stayed silent for a moment, then finally said, "Are you going to keep standing there?" Zayn blinked. "Oh." He scrambled into the car and quickly gave Gavin directions. The ride was silent. Zayn kept sneaking glances at Gavin. When they reached the school, Zayn jumped out of the car, too focused on getting to his exam to even say thank you. Gavin watched him dash off, shook his head slightly, and drove away. Without his lucky necklace, Zayn was nervous during the exam, but in the end, he nailed it. When he got home exhausted, he flopped onto his bed. As he lay there, something pricked his back. Frowning, he checked and found his lucky necklace, tangled in the sheets. He stared at it in disbelief, biting his lip in embarrassment and regret. He had left it at home all along. The realization that he had falsely accused Gavin and even dragged him to the police made his face burn with shame. Even if he wanted to apologize, he had no way to contact Gavin. All he could do was hope they would never cross paths again. He didn't think he could handle the humiliation of facing him. Finally, Zayn graduated, ready to step into the working world. Finding a job as a fresh graduate wasn't easy, but luck seemed to be on his side. He received an offer after a successful interview. He would be working as the personal assistant to the president of a big company. On his first day, Zayn felt a mix of nerves and excitement. He told himself to stay confident and do his best. After receiving his company ID and access card, he was led to the president's office. Standing before the door, he took a deep breath, knocked, and heard a voice invite him in. As he stepped inside, ready to introduce himself, his eyes widened in shock. Sitting at the desk was Gavin, the same man he had falsely accused in the cafe. Panic took over, and before he could think, Zayn spun on his heel and bolted out of the office. He stopped in the hallway, heart racing, berating himself. "Why did I run out? Now it's even worse." Zane forced himself to turn back. Embarrassed and scared, he braced himself for whatever was about to happen. Zane knocked again, his palms sweaty. When Gavin's voice called for him to enter, he timidly stepped inside. "Good morning, sir," he stuttered, barely meeting Gavin's gaze. Gavin glanced at him, his expression unreadable, before his eyes shifted to Zane's neck. Slowly, Gavin got up from his seat and walked toward him. Zane instinctively backed away until his back hit the wall, leaving him with nowhere else to go. Gavin stopped inches from him, tilting Zane's chin up with a finger to get a closer look at the necklace. "I see you found your necklace." Zane's heart raced, and he blinked rapidly. He had hoped Gavin wouldn't remember, but who could forget being falsely accused of stealing? "I am sorry for that day," Zane stammered. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have accused you just because my necklace looked like yours. It won't happen again. Ever. Please don't fire me." Gavin studied him for a moment before stepping back. "Why fire you?" he said, turning and walking back to his desk, "when it's better to keep you around instead." Zane gulped. Gavin picked up a stack of documents and handed them to him. "Print copies of these," he ordered curtly. Zane hesitated. "Don't I need to introduce myself first?" "No introduction needed," Gavin replied without looking up. "I already read your CV." "Oh, okay then," Zane muttered, taking the documents and quickly leaving the office. As he walked down the hall, his mind raced. Gavin wasn't going to let this go. He was definitely going to give him a hard time. After asking around, Zane finally found the printing room. But as he stared at the documents, he realized he'd forgotten to ask how many copies Gavin needed. He decided to play it safe and printed as many as he could. Returning to Gavin's office, Zane nervously handed him the printed documents. Gavin took them without comment and asked, "What's my schedule for today?" Zane froze. I'm not sure yet. I was going to inquire about it right away." "There's no need," Gavin replied calmly. "You can leave now. I'll call when I need you." Zane hesitated. "Okay," he murmured before walking out. Left with free time, Zane decided to familiarize himself with his new workplace. He spent some time meeting colleagues and eventually obtained Gavin's schedule. Hours passed, but Gavin didn't call him for any additional tasks. Bored and feeling useless, Zane wandered the halls until he spotted Gavin leaving his office. Perking up, Zane quickly followed, knowing Gavin was heading to a meeting. As his personal assistant, it was his job to accompany him to work-related events. But Gavin, noticing Zane trailing behind, turned and said, "You don't have to follow. I'll go alone." Then he walked away without waiting for a response. Disappointed, Zane stopped in his tracks. Was this Gavin's way of getting back at him, or did he just not need him? At the meeting, Gavin handled everything himself, distributing materials and taking his own notes. After the meeting, the vice president, Kent, who was also Gavin's cousin, approached him. "Where's your PA?" "Who?" Gavin replied. Kent sighed. He wasn't surprised. Gavin had always preferred to handle everything himself, overloading his schedule and refusing help. "I hired you a personal assistant to lighten your workload, but you're still doing everything yourself," Kent pointed out. "I don't need a college student to reduce my workload," Gavin replied flatly. "He's already graduated," Kent countered. "Same thing. You know how I like my things done, quickly and in order. I don't need a kid slowing me down." "How do you know he'll slow you down if you haven't given him a chance?" Kent asked. "I did," Gavin said with a shrug. "He's not cut out for it." "So, are you planning to fire him?" Kent pressed. Gavin hesitated for a moment. "We'll see," he said finally before walking away. The day ended without Zane being given a single task, leaving him frustrated. The next day on his way to work, he passed by a flower shop. He decided to pick some for Gavin to make peace with him. Arriving at the office, he knocked on Gavin's door and entered, handing him the flowers. Before Zane could say anything, Gavin frowned deeply, waving them away. "Take it away," he said curtly. Zane's eyes narrowed in offense. "It's just flowers. You don't have to react like that." But before Gavin could respond, Zane noticed him sneezing and scratching his neck aggressively. Realizing with horror that Gavin must be allergic, Zane quickly moved the flowers aside and froze, panicking. "What do I do?" Zane muttered to himself before dashing out of the office. He sprinted to the nearest pharmacy and returned with an ointment for itching. Back in Gavin's office, Zane gently took Gavin's hand, stopping him from scratching, and applied the ointment to his neck while blowing at it. Gavin swallowed, moving in his seat at how close Zane was. Finishing up, Zane stepped back and apologized. "I'm sorry, I didn't know you were allergic to flowers." Gavin waved a hand dismissively. "It's fine." "I didn't know what to get for the sneezing though," Zane admitted. Gavin opened a drawer and pulled out a small bottle of medication. "I've got something for that." "Oh, that's good," Zane said with relief. He hesitated before adding, "If the itching doesn't stop, you shouldn't scratch it. Just blow on it instead." Gavin's lips twitched into a faint smile. "How exactly do I blow on my own neck?" Zane blinked before realizing. "Oh, right. Then just call me, and I'll blow on it for you." Gavin, the faint smile still lingering, said, "You can leave now. I'll call you if I need you." But Zane didn't move. His shoulders slumped slightly. "Again? Do you have a problem with me? Is it because of what happened the first day we met? You haven't given me any significant task or any task at all." Gavin replied bluntly, "I just don't think you're capable enough to be my PA." Zane stared at him. "How do you know I'm not capable if you haven't given me a chance?" Gavin went silent, studying him for a moment. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and said, "All right, let me put you to the test then." He handed Zane a folder. "There's a meeting with some potential investors for our new product. You'll attend in my place. Convince them to invest and get them to sign the contract." Zane's eyes widened as he realized the weight of the task. This was a huge responsibility. He masked his nerves with a confident smile and accepted the assignment. Clutching the folder, he quickly skimmed through the details of the new product. While heading to the meeting, he mentally rehearsed a pitch, determined to make it work. Luckily, he arrived early, giving him precious time to polish his presentation. By the time the investors walked in, Zane had managed to push aside his nervousness. As the meeting progressed, his initial anxiety was replaced by confidence. He spoke with charm and clarity, blending his knowledge of the product with a persuasive tone. It didn't take long for the investors to agree. The contracts were signed, and Zane left the meeting with a sense of accomplishment and pride. Practically beaming, he returned to Gavin's office. Forgetting himself, he almost barged in but stopped to knock at the last second. "Come in," Gavin's voice called out. Zane entered, the wide smile still plastered on his face. "It's signed," he said enthusiastically, handing Gavin the signed contracts. Gavin glanced at his watch. That was quick. Zane's smile grew wider. Gavin smiled softly. "I already heard the news. Good job, I guess. Maybe I underestimated you a little bit." "Just a little bit?" Zane asked. "Okay, a lot," Gavin admitted, and they both burst into a light chuckle. The days that followed, Gavin began involving Zane more in his work. He invited him to meetings, asking for his opinions and even considering them. On occasions where Zane's suggestions needed refinement, Gavin would patiently explain how to improve them. He put Zane on important tasks, even though he still reviewed everything Zane worked on, correcting any errors, but he always took the time to explain and teach him where he went wrong. Zane always went to him when he didn't understand or know how to go about something, and Gavin always took time to teach him. Zane began liking Gavin more and more, realizing he was a chill guy who was just particular about his work. Zane admired him and wished to be like him one day in the future. With all the time Zane had spent with Gavin, he noticed Gavin never spoke about or to any romantic partner. It was always business. One day, while working on some papers together, Zane asked, "Do you have a partner? I mean, a romantic partner?" Gavin replied with a smirk. "Why? Are you interested in me?" Zane quickly waved his hand in denial. No, he said hastily. Yet, despite his denial, Zane couldn't shake the strange feeling that he wasn't being entirely honest with himself. He added, "I was just curious." Gavin shrugged casually. "I don't have time for one. I can't give them the 24-hour attention they always seem to want." "Not everyone is like that," Zane countered. "You never know. Maybe you'll end up being the one seeking attention when you fall really hard for someone." Gavin let out a soft breath, remarking, "Why does everyone want me in a relationship?" Few days later, Zane noticed Gavin leaving the office at an unusual time. His schedule didn't indicate a meeting or anything urgent, so Zane stood up to follow him, wondering where they were heading to. Gavin stopped him. "You don't have to follow me. It's not work-related," he said. You can leave early if you want. I'm not coming back today. Zane hesitated, then asked, Can I ask where you're going to? Gavin replied, A blind date. Zane felt his chest tighten, a sharp pang of jealousy rising. A blind date? He echoed, trying to sound casual. Gavin confirmed with a nod. I've got to go. I hate being late. With that, he walked away. Watching him leave, Zane couldn't suppress the growing unease and curiosity, gnawing at him. Who was Gavin meeting? How would he act around them? Without thinking too much about it, Zane decided to follow him. He trailed Gavin to a nearby restaurant and took a seat where he could clearly see the table Gavin was at, shielding his face with a menu. A waiter approached asking for his order, and Zane quickly brushed him off. I'm still deciding, he said hurriedly. When he looked back, Gavin and his date were gone. He lowered the menu in confusion, muttering, Where did they go? A voice replied, Here. Zane spun around to see Gavin sitting right in front of him. His got startled in his seat. How did you get here? On my legs, Gavin replied. What are you doing here? Zane laughed nervously, trying to play it off. I just came here to eat. Gavin nodded and called for a waiter. He glanced at Zane and asked, What did you pick from the menu? Zane, realizing he hadn't even looked, randomly pointed at something. Gavin raised a brow but didn't comment, placing both their orders with the waiter. As they waited for their food, Zane said, Your date was quick. It didn't even last 5 minutes, Gavin replied. Were you timing us? Zane immediately shook his head. No, of course not. Gavin smirked faintly. I just came to tell her I wasn't interested. Zane let out a small, unconscious sigh of relief. You could have just done that over the phone or something, he said, trying to sound casual. Gavin shook his head. Some things are better said in person. Zane nodded thoughtfully. Oh. They sat in silence for a moment before Zane broke it. What's your type? Gavin leaned back slightly, thinking. I never really gave it much thought, he admitted. Zane hesitated before asking, What do you think about guys? What do you think about me? Gavin's gaze lingered on Zane for a second. I think you're optimistic, imaginative, and creative, hardworking, inquisitive, cute. Zane couldn't help but grin at the last word. That's not really what I meant, but I'll take the cute. Gavin hid a small smile, saying nothing. Their food arrived soon after, and Zane's enthusiasm faltered at the first bite. He hadn't even known what he'd ordered, and it definitely wasn't to his taste. Gavin noticed immediately and without a word, swapped their plates. In the days that followed, Zane began dropping subtle hints about his growing feelings for Gavin, but Gavin remained oblivious. One morning, while grabbing coffee for Gavin at the nearby cafe, Zane ran into Kent. They spoke for a while, and their conversation eventually drifted to Gavin. Zane, unable to keep it in, confessed he liked Gavin and asked for ideas on how to get him to notice. Kent chuckled knowingly. With someone like Gavin, you've just got to be direct. He's not the type to pick up on subtle hints. Say it clearly, or he'll never realize. They both walked back to the office, talking and laughing. Gavin heard Zane's voice from a mile away and moved to the window, discreetly watching as Zane and Kent walked toward the building, laughing and chatting. A strange sense of jealousy stirred in his chest. He quickly returned to his desk before Zane could reach the office, pretending to focus on his work. When Zane finally entered and set down the coffee, Gavin tried to sound casual. What were you two talking and laughing about? He asked, but his sulky expression gave him away. Zane noticed and couldn't hide his amusement. Is he jealous? He wondered, feeling a spark of hope. Maybe Gavin was starting to feel something for him too. Nothing much. Just chatting, Zane replied with a grin. Gavin nodded, though he clearly didn't believe him. He made Zane sit beside him to work on some documents Gavin had already finished earlier, his gaze flickering to Zane every few seconds. Later, as Gavin was leaving for the day, he found himself wandering to Kent's office. When Kent looked up, he greeted him with a raised eyebrow. A surprise visit? I just came for my pen, Gavin replied stiffly, grabbing a pen he'd left behind months ago. He turned to leave but hesitated, forcing himself to speak. Do you like him? Kent replied. Who? Your cute PA. Gavin blinked. Cute? Kent smirked and nodded. Yeah, cute. Don't you agree? An uncontrollable smile tugged at Gavin's lips before he quickly masked it. He is, he muttered, almost too quietly, before snapping back to reality. But that's not the point. You haven't answered my question. Kent chuckled. I like him, yeah. Gavin's glare darkened until Kent quickly clarified. Not in the way you think. Relax. You don't have to worry about me snatching him from you, but you should worry about others. He gestured toward the window, where Zane was laughing and chatting closely with another colleague. That guy looks like he has a thing for your PA. Before Kent could say anything else, Gavin was already out the door, walking toward Zane. Gavin asked, Do you need a ride home? Zane smiled and replied, No, I'm going with my friend, nodding toward the colleague he had been chatting with earlier. Without saying another word, Gavin shot a sharp glare at the colleague, then grabbed Zane's hand, not roughly but firmly, and pulled him toward his car. Zane didn't protest, his face lighting up with a satisfied smile, as Gavin opened the passenger door and made him sit inside. As Gavin climbed into the driver's seat and started the car, Zane pretended to struggle with his seatbelt, glancing at Gavin with an innocent expression. Gavin leaned over to help, his hands brushing against Zane's. As he worked to secure the belt, their faces came close, their lips mere inches apart. Gavin avoided meeting Zane's gaze, his eyes fixed on the task, but Zane caught the subtle movement of Gavin's Adam's apple as he swallowed. Gavin quickly got it done, feeling Zane's breath at the side of his lips. Sitting back, his mind so scattered that he momentarily looked for the steering wheel that was right in front of him. Zane chuckled to himself, clearly enjoying Gavin's flustered state. Zane showed Gavin a shorter route to his house, but Gavin ignored it, choosing a longer route filled with traffic instead. He didn't mind the delay. It just meant more time with Zane. Eventually, though, they reached Zane's house. As Zane unbuckled and stepped out, he waved goodbye. Gavin watched him go, his grip tightening on the wheel, as he fought the urge to call him back. He stayed parked until Zane disappeared inside, only then driving off. Later that night, as Gavin lay in bed, he picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over Zane's number. Without realizing it, he almost pressed call before stopping himself. Is this what it feels like to like someone and wanting to be with them every second? He hugged his pillow, kicking his feet. Why is tomorrow taking so long? The next morning, Gavin arrived at work unusually early, eagerly waiting for Zane's arrival. When he finally heard a knock at his office door, his heart skipped a beat. Come in, he called, his voice a little too quick. Zane stepped in with a bright smile. Good morning. Gavin opened his mouth to speak but ended up blurting out, You look good in that shirt. Zane glanced down at his outfit, then replied, I've worn this shirt 100 times. You always look good in it, Gavin said back. Zane's smile grew wider, before telling Gavin about his schedule for the day. As Zane spoke, he couldn't help but think to himself that he didn't need to stress into getting Gavin to like him. He seemed to be falling already. In the following days, Gavin's attempts to get Zane's attention became more obvious, albeit clumsy. He was utterly clueless about how to act around Zane. Every interaction left him flustered, which only amused Zane. One morning, when Zane arrived at work, he discovered that his desk and chair were gone. He asked around, but everyone claimed they'd found it missing when they arrived. Deciding to greet Gavin first before sorting out his desk situation, Zane walked into Gavin's office, only to find his desk and chair placed right beside Gavin's. Tilting his head in amusement, Zane asked, Is that my desk? Caught off guard, Gavin hadn't prepared an excuse. He blurted out the first thing that came to mind. The telephone I used to call for you broke. I thought it'd be easier if you were in here. Zane asked, But your mobile phone works just fine. With no better excuse, Gavin sighed, Just stay. It's already here. Zane smirked, muttering under his breath, I wasn't planning on leaving, before taking a seat. As they worked on some documents together, Gavin kept finding excuses to pull Zane's chair closer, claiming he was sitting too far away. At some point, Zane dozed off, resting his cheek against the desk. With his eyes closed, Gavin gently brushed some stray hair from Zane's face, his fingers lingering as he softly played with Zane's hair. He watched him with a tender, affectionate smile, completely absorbed in the quiet moment. Just then, Zane opened his eyes. Gavin didn't have time to pull his hand away. It was still tangled in Zane's hair. Zane asked, Mr. Gavin, do you like me? Gavin froze, caught completely off guard. His flustered mind scrambled for a response, but he ended up looking down and returning to the papers, holding them upside down in his rush to appear busy. Zane chuckled softly, reaching over to flip the papers upright while watching him closely. I like you, he said simply. Do you feel the same about me? Gavin's breath hitched. He didn't say anything at first, his hands sweating. When Zane got no response, he sighed theatrically, standing up with a pout. I guess you don't. Before Zane could take a step, Gavin quickly grabbed his arm. I do. Zane's lips curved into a wide smile as he sat back down, leaning in close. Really? Gavin gave a small nod, his gaze flickering to Zane's lips, which were really close to his own. Slowly, he leaned in, his nerves evident in every movement. Before he could fully close the gap, Zane pressed a quick kiss to his lips, catching Gavin completely off guard. Gavin's eyes widened in surprise as he swallowed nervously, leaning in again. This time, Zane met him halfway, their lips meeting in a soft, lingering kiss. Suddenly, a knock at the door shattered the moment. They broke apart, Gavin groaning in frustration as his gaze darted toward the door. He didn't even bother asking who it was, he just wanted to get back to Zane. But Zane stood up to open the door. Before he could turn the knob, Gavin grabbed his hand and pinned him gently against the wall. Opening the door just a crack, Gavin leaned out and asked curtly, What do you want? The employee on the other side stammered, I need Zane's help with some work, he's busy, Gavin said flatly before shutting the door in his face. He turned back to Zane, his hand sliding to Zane's waist as he cupped Zane's cheek with his other hand, his thumb brushing his cheek, leaning in. That was mean, Zane remarked. Should I go apologize? Gavin asked. Later, Zane said, grabbing Gavin by his tie and pulling him in for a kiss. Their lips met again, this time more intense, more deliberate. Gavin parted his lips slightly, taking Zane's bottom lip between his, deepening the kiss. The kiss was intense but tender as they both drowned in it. As Zane's lips left his, Gavin's mouth trailed after them. Their lips were swollen, red, and glistening. Zane teased him with a smirk. We should get back to work, Mr. President. Gavin huffed but followed Zane back to their desks. Unsatisfied with the small distance between them, he pulled Zane's chair closer until there was no space left. Taking Zane's hand, he laced their fingers together. For the rest of the day, Gavin barely let Zane out of his sight, clinging to him. After work, Gavin drove Zane home. Before getting out of the car, Zane leaned in and placed a soft kiss on Gavin's cheek. As Zane walked toward his front door, he glanced back and noticed Gavin following him. He stopped, turning around with an amused chuckle. What's wrong? Gavin looked at him, his expression soft and needy. I miss you. Zane laughed, pulling Gavin into an embrace. I just left the car. Gavin rested his chin on Zane's shoulder, their cheeks brushing gently. I know, but I already miss you, he murmured. Zane smiled, his voice dropping to a low tone. Do you want to come in? Before Zane could even finish his sentence, Gavin slipped out of his arms and made his way toward the house. Zane chuckled again, quickly catching up to him and intertwining their fingers as they walked inside together.